Hi, and welcome to another episode of Rule of Carnage. This is where myself, Glenn Ford, a game designer and developer, chats to this guy, Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer and developer, about designing better miniatures games. So there's one, I think, fairly big subject where, if you watch the channel, quite often we cover like mechanics and rules and things of that nature. And there's one big area that I think we've not touched on that's worth sort of talking about and is very, very important for a game.
Is that whether or not we pluralize miniatures in miniatures games? So I still can't decide.
Surgeons General, yeah. Yes, well, it's the players. I mean, specifically player psychology, and I thought it'd be interesting to have a little chat in this video about player personality types. Now, there's an enormous amount of literature out there on player personality types, and it goes into enormous depth and is very fascinating and worth reading. However, quite a lot of it is about sort of video game player personality types. So there are like some major personality types, like the explorer personality type, that's not impossible to do on the tabletop in a tabletop miniatures game, but incredibly hard and possibly less relevant. And so what I'm going to sort of frame this around today is the Magic the Gathering player types. Also, because this is probably something that tabletop gamers might well be familiar with and have heard of before. And these are sort of player personality types that the Magic the Gathering designers sort of pitch cards as being for when they design those cards. The sort of the players will want those cards in their decks or will be attracted to by them. And they quite neatly frame, I think, particularly in relation to things like army building, and the attractions to a game, some of the attractions for different personality types for a miniatures game. And so I think they're worth addressing and thinking about, and thinking particularly about how you can attract those player personality types by putting in the things that they look for in your game. So we'll probably have this as two conversations. In the first one, we're going to talk about the three sort of classic original Magic the Gathering personality types. They've been sort of gender neutralized recently, but they're originally Johnny, Timmy, and Spike. So we'll start with so Johnny is sort of referenced by the Magic the Gathering designers as the complex creative combo player. In more classical terms, I would say that a Johnny player is somebody who plays to express themselves, to express their sort of creativity in designing, obviously Magic the Gathering, a sort of a deck, but in our sorts of games, an army list. These are the people who want to find delicious army lists that are unusual and weird and do strange or interesting things. I mean, I would say, like, of the personality types, I personally most strongly identify with the Johnny personality type myself. A Johnny personality wants to win, but it's very important that they win on their own terms. It's a choice between getting a win by playing like a Spike character or losing. They'll take losing. Winning at all costs isn't important. It's important that you win by triggering your combo or by doing the interesting thing. You want the other person to, once they've seen you win, go, oh yeah, that was very sweet. That was lovely that you did that.
Right. And so, like, Johnny's not interested in taking the obvious route to victory. And by extension, if a non-obvious route has become popular and net listed or whatever, then it's also now not interesting.
Absolutely. That's so we'll talk about Spike in a minute. Net listing is a Spike thing, and it is like offensive to a Johnny character. The Johnny character in list building is attracted to weak and undervalued options. They love the thing that is officially broken in a negative way, not like it's broken because it's OP. It's like it's broken because you're a lunatic if you try and take this. That's like catnip to your Johnny character. They're like, okay, I have to make that list. I have to change everybody's mind about that thing because you've all agreed that it's complete garbage. One of the things I think about a Johnny personality particularly is that they need guidance. They need lines to press against. They need sort of structures that they can strain themselves against. One of the things I think is super interesting, and I've been finding recently talking to people who obviously, I come across a lot of people with sort of their own designs and various designs, is that a lot of the designs I'm seeing at the moment weirdly are falling into one of two categories to my mind in relation to the sort of Johnny mindset. One of them is, my game is like totally everything agnostic. You have all of the options in the world sort of in a big bucket, and you take out whatever you want from it, and there are no sort of, I'm not going to control you, I'm not going to make you play a certain way or do a certain thing. And another set of them are like, okay, list building is like one of the things that defines a miniatures game. I've heard several people say that weirdly in the last couple of months. It's funny because despite this being the sort of thing that attracts me to games, I definitely don't think miniatures games defined by list building. But those
it's a common design feature at the moment, but I agree with you, it's in no way definitional.
No, it's a trope, it's a major element, but it's not at all a definition of the form. But the people I've seen doing these designs then have these sort of extremely arcane sort of list building systems with like, there's a million different options and decision trees through them that are like, everybody's going to bounce off this immediately.
And you've met, I just want to make sure to get this point in early. Like, you've mentioned that you identify with this Johnny character, and we'll get on to some of the other members of this crew. But I think one of the most powerful things in understanding and taking the time to think about these things is that, like, I'm a particular kind of player, you're a particular kind of player, we happen to be different kinds of players. It has been part of my journey as a games designer to realize that fact, and to realize that there isn't one true way. Like, my way of approaching things is the best way for me and people like me, but the best game that I can make has a little something for me, and a little something for Glenn, and a little something for other people who are interested in other things. So I like, as we're having this conversation, my mind is ticking over, going like, yeah, where are the places in my previous designs where I have skipped over providing juicy nuggets of toffee for any one of these groups?
Absolutely. And this is one where I think that it's like, it's really handy if you can, particularly if you recognize yourself or one of your friends in one of these personality types.
Right.
Because often I'll write things and I'll think, okay, this is a thing that Mike or someone like Mike is really going to like, because I don't like the things in games that you like. And, I'll often think of a thing or a rule. I'll think, I'll put this in because this will please Mike. And he will smile when he sees this.
Is it a handle that says fireworks and you pull it and it goes? Ooh.
Well, it's of that nature, and we'll talk about the type that I think you fall into more strongly, which is Timmy, in a second. But I think the thing is that for a Johnny type, like, the cardinal sins of design are like excessive looseness, excessive freedom. It's almost like, if you think of somebody who loves like solving mazes, and then you dump them in a field and go, well, you can build any maze you like in this field. I have given you total maze freedom. They just go, well, I'll just walk out the field. I'm not a lunatic. This is completely unsatisfying to me. And I think in relation to a lot of these, as I was sort of researching these, I sort of thought, one of the things about Gaslands, and I know I'd say this because we sort of worked on it, Gaslands hits a lot of these things quite sweetly, and I think it's a large part of why it was such a strong game. And it does have those things in the sponsors, obviously, and the build slots and the way you can put cars together that are very strongly sort of angled towards this sort of gamer and satisfying to them. But I think what's important in relation to something like Gaslands is that it doesn't put off the person who isn't this kind of player. It doesn't say you have to learn this incredibly arcane thing and engage in a meta and all those sorts of things to enjoy this game. It says, look, this thing is here, but it will work just fine if you just load up a car with some missiles and go for it. You won't be heavily disadvantaged, and you won't feel like you're missing out on the real deal of the game. You'll just sort of have chosen not to engage with part of it.
Now, I know you're not following the Warhammer 40,000 new edition very closely. I've dived feet first into it because partly I'm an old 40k fan, and this one looks attractive to me. But partly I like being part of what's going on in the biggest part of the community to see what's going on now. Specifically related to Johnny, Games Workshop have made a change in the most recent presentation of 10th edition Warhammer 40,000, which I think is really smart for Johnny specifically. So for the last decade or so, there's been 3 ways to play any Warhammer game. There's been open, which is basically like free-form jazz, just put all your toys on the table, who cares? Like, if you're not having fun, it's your fault, not mine. Then there's narrative, which is let's string the battles together in some kind of scenario-laden, asymmetric story time. And then there's, matched play, like competitive, sort of skewed, good for pickups and that or not. And they've reset that, and in the new version, they've got 3 versions. They basically kept match play and narrative, but they swapped out the first one for this thing called Combat Patrol, which is basically you buy a box of models and it comes with enough rules to get stuck into the game quickly, and that's good for a couple of reasons. One is it's good for introducing people to the game because it provides them with no list building, but it's a no list building version that still works for Johnny, because Johnny can pick one of a number of boxes which are considered to be junk, and he gets enough options in there to prove that, if you do use the space elves correctly, then actually you can win even in this funny little game mode. And so I think that removing the open play way to play, the canonical way to play, is actually a really smart choice, because open play was a really mono-directed play mode that only pointed at a subset of their player base, whereas what they've replaced it with is actually much more viable for all of the player types that we're talking about. And so I think that's interesting, because obviously they're a big company who are doing more research than most of us.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, actually, because we were having a chat the other day about 10th edition, and you were saying about how, like, previously you repeatedly got annoyed by the merry-go-round of like army books and codexes coming out from GW, and then you re-get it and you go like, oh, I have to sort of figure out, well, great, now my favorite miniature is garbage again. And one of the things I wanted to say, I said to you at the time, what's interesting is that for the players like me, that's getting to re-engage with the bit of the hobby that we love. It's like, that's not a sort of, oh, this again. It's like,
right. So quite specific. Yeah. So quite specifically what I was saying was, like, there's a thing in 10th edition now where you buy a squad, and regardless of what the weapon options it's got, they're all free. You can just choose whether you have plasma pistols or bolt pistols or like cardboard cutouts of people, and they all cost the same amount. So obviously one of them is the optimal choice. And so if you built the models under the old edition because you were like, well, the optimal choice is to not spend 2 extra points per model on plasma pistols, you're now an idiot, because you may as well. And so now you have to rebuild your force. But what you were saying is, like, when I play an army for a few years and then a new set of rules comes along and invalidates that army, it's like, ooh, a wonderful challenge has been thrown down for me to re-engage with the crunchiest part of this trifle.
Yeah. Well, it's like, okay, I've built my list. Then I spend the next sort of year or two proving that list is what I thought it was going to be, and proving my point by playing it through and expressing myself by this thing that I found. Now I would like to redo that, please. I've made my point. It's time to move on. Talking about time to move on. So, okay, the second personality type, and this is the one that I always feel sort of is the Mike sort of personality type, if any of them singly are. This one they call Timmy. So in Magic the Gathering, Timmy is the player who is obsessed with putting down a big creature, like a big single card, and then seeing it absolutely wang somebody in the face and like smash him off the board. And they always put it down, and then somebody drops a 2-point kill spell and then immediately knocks them off. And Timmy doesn't really care because Timmy got to put down his big creature and we all got to see the big creature and all that. Timmy plays to experience. They're a much more social gamer. They're interested in things that say they're powerful on the box, say that they're fireworks factories. They're interested in trying out lots of different options. They're much more interested in sort of diversity. They don't want to focus on one thing and perfect it. They want to get as many of the toys out of the box as they possibly can. They are sort of a little bit more adrenaline driven sometimes than other players. They are also, if there are some, they are, because of their social nature, people most likely to be sort of griefers in gaming. They're the people who want to get a reaction out of you, and at best that means they want to share the game with you and they want you to sort of have this sort of experience between the two of you, but as long as they get a reaction out of you, that's kind of one of the most important things. And it's this thing of playing to experience. They're the spectacle makers. They want a big boom to occur on the tabletop. Again, they're sort of their cardinal sin, and it's very much one of Mike's sort of great sort of game design mantras, is to avoid moments of nothing. The worst possible outcome is that nothing occurs. They don't mind getting absolutely destroyed on the tabletop so long as something really, really happened and stuff went on. So long as they didn't lose by non-moments occurring repeatedly, that's all they really care about. And ideally that they can then say to the other person, wow, did you see that? If it was, wow, did you just see how my unit got absolutely obliterated by that hellstorm of rocket fire coming in? That's fine with them. That's okay, so long as they can go, hey, we really experienced a thing there together, didn't we? That was super fun and exciting.
So Timmy plays orcs in Warhammer 40,000, does he?
Yes, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's they want the Gigantosaurus Rex in Magic. They want orcs in Warhammer. They want things to blow up. They want an experience to occur. And obviously, referencing back to Gaslands, I think it's pretty clear to a lot of people where the Timmy moments are in Gaslands. The wipeout, flip, explosion, the fact that you so often win a race upside down and on fire are super Timmy things. They're super I don't care that...
Right, the whole of the sixth gear is just for him. Apart from when Johnny's proving that he doesn't need to turn because he can just spins.
Spins are the best way to steer. Well, just the very idea that one of the core sort of concepts of Gaslands is you blow up and you think it was funny. You enjoy yourself you enjoy your stuff getting destroyed, is an inherent sort of way you can play Gaslands, and not as a power move, but just as because it was just brilliant and everyone got involved. And then you get the chain reaction thing where I flip and blow up, and that causes you to wipe out and flip, and you land on him when you flip, and then you blow up. And that's the whole sort of wipeout, explosion, chain reaction phenomena in Gaslands is the most sort of Timmy thing you'll ever come across in a game, because it doesn't matter how you built your lists, that thing is going to happen at some point, and it's going to appear to be a mad chain reaction, although it'll happen a lot more often than you might suspect. And everyone got involved. Everyone at the table had some, level of effect on it, and it's a very shared experience that's sort of very important to that sort of gamer type. And I think, as I say, I often think of things. I don't think of things when I'm designing to be is it a play to experience moment? Is it a Timmy moment? I think, will this make Mike smile when I write those rules in a game, and those moments in a game.
So just to summarize before we move on, so Johnny, you got to make sure that there are non-obvious ways to win, and for Timmy, you got to make sure that there are as few moments of nothingness as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to give Johnny this thing where they can express themselves by finding something other people haven't found. That's what's
Right.
really important, I think. I think it's like
Hidden treasures.
usually if I go to a club and a few other people are playing a game that I haven't picked up yet and I'm interested in it, my first question is always which faction is nobody else playing.
Mm.
That is what's instantly attractive. And if everyone's playing one of the factions, and they're going to find one and find the master that nobody else is using.
Now, there's another form of expressing yourself, which I guess we will get onto. But there's like the other reason for asking that question is because you want to demonstrate yourself like artistically, or you want to fit into, you want to complete the pantheon. You want to be. It's more like there's almost like a socializing aspect there. It's like, well, what are you missing to make this world richer for everyone? Well, I'll go play those guys, because if no one's playing Tomb Kings, like I'll bring the Tomb Kings. That'll be amazing.
Yeah, and that fits in a little bit with one of the player character types we'll talk about in the next conversation. And it has to be said, these are an incomplete picture because they are taken from Magic the Gathering. They're much more about, like, particularly these three are more about the list building process and some of the mechanics. And because there aren't really like a definitive set of these versions of player types for miniatures, tabletop gaming, nobody happens to have like written a book on this. Maybe GW has a version of these player types pinned on a wall somewhere, but they've never like openly released them to everybody else in the way that Magic the Gathering does, and people haven't written like major books focusing on this sort of part of the hobby. So these will be an incomplete picture, and we'll talk about that a bit in the next sort of conversation. And then yes, I think you're probably the best person to answer what you need to put in for a Timmy, but I think it is like, yeah, make sure that nothing like there are no null events, that you roll dice and you're expecting a thing to happen that was going to be fun and then that gets pulled away from you. And the last of those three sort of classic Magic the Gathering personality types is the Spike. Now, Spike is the sort of the classic competitive player. Spike is playing to prove. They're the net listers. They will take anybody else's list. They don't care that it's somebody else wrote it and somebody else did the sort of, I know, creative thinking or whatever, how you want to think about it. They're about innovating and sort of tinkering and perfecting, analyzing things on a very, very, very close in level and doing tiny little millimeter tweaks, and they're more than happy to turn up. It's, for me, the thing that killed going to tournaments like big GW tournaments was turning up and seeing like a hall of 80 people and there being 3 lists in the entire hall. That's what a Spike player lives for. They're like, this is fantastic. And they have, I think, to many people's minds, sort of come to dominate like the Magic the Gathering tournament scene, to the point where you get deck lists published, and then like all the top players have one of those 3 or 4 lists with like a minor tweak backwards and forwards, to the point where like fans of Magic the Gathering will just say, oh, they have the blah blah deck. And it's like, if you're not familiar with it, you'll go, well, what the hell is a blah blah deck? And it's like, well, that's the one that became dominant in the previous 2 tournaments.
And my head canon of this player type is that they are most interested in like executing amazingly. Like performance at the table is much more important than originality or like ownership in the list creation. So these are people who like that. They're almost like more in the moment than Johnny is, because they are living for that tussle at the table where you're like, well, I've got to pilot this list to success.
Yeah, it's they're very much focused on like it is actually about the winning, because it's about proving to everybody that you thought that swapping out this thing, that's 5 points cheaper or more expensive, or tweaking that weapon or adding this unit made the list more efficient. And then you get to prove to everybody that you were right about that. They will have to acknowledge that you're right about, because you just won it. And I've met like, particular sorts of Spike players at tournaments. It's like I met a chap on one of the top I managed to get to a top table in one of the tournaments, and the guy next to me was so excited because if he won his next game, his list would be a net list because he would like have won the tournament. And so from then on, next tournament he would turn up and he would see like 100 clones of his army, and that was like the highest good to him. It was like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to be like the progenitor of one of these things that I love so much. And to me, it'd be like, well, that just means I'd have to burn the list at that point.
Right, yeah.
It'd be like that would absolutely kill it stone dead.
Is it the difference between wanting to be an A-list celebrity and wanting to be so hipster that no one's even heard of the bands you listen to?
I think I think it's sort of that. I think
like Kurt Cobain was a Johnny because he was like, well, now I'm famous, I have to kill myself.
Well, I think a lot of these things, I think I call the Johnny personality type the sort of the need to express, but I think these are all ultimately about the different ways you want to express yourself.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what I was elbowing at in the earlier comment, is that I think it doesn't feel right to say Johnny plays to express themselves, because I think many of us do. I guess expression in my like, for me, like narrative and sort of social play is a form of expressing yourself as an individual, like playing to sort of to win and to demonstrate that, like in a battle of wits, you know, you come out on top, like obviously completely legitimate way to express yourself. And that's what I love about this, is that there's no value judgment here. These are all just things you have to deal with, there are humans that compute the world in different ways and will focus on different elements of your game design, and will be cross with your game if it leaves them completely cold on the things that they're looking for.
Absolutely. And it's a personal thing for me. It bugs the hell out of me when I see like designers talk about their game, and I basically ask some questions that boil down to, well, how is this going to work for a sort of Spike personality type? And their response is essentially, I don't care about that personality type. They're not the right kind of player for me. They're not enjoying the game in the right way. And it's like, that's wrong. Everybody, you know, there's no right or wrong to any of these personality types. They all want to enjoy your game in their own way, and you can cater to all of them.
Yeah, I had a very, like, this has happened a lot, but we had a fresh comment somewhere in the Discord over the last couple of weeks where somebody said about, I think it was about Hobgoblin. They were like, well, I don't see this as being a competitive game. It's more of a beer and pretzels game. And I think there's plenty about both A Billion Suns and Hobgoblin for Spike, insofar as there's a knotty little engine that at the table is a very two-directional, like it's a combative environment. The rules are tight, and you can definitely best someone at sword point. I think what's interesting is that perhaps the personality that I have, being quite a Timmy player, shines through in the way that I present my games, or the way that I design my games, or the things that I emphasize. And so perhaps people who are more like me, there's more of them gravitating to my games, or all sorts of gamers will look at that and sort of naturally begin to filter it through. Because this person wasn't saying anything offensive. They were simply saying, well, I like your game for this reason, and it's not something that I can equate with the competitive mindset, ergo it's not a competitive game. But of course, I'm trying hard to say, well, no, if you take A Billion Suns very seriously and play it like it's some kind of chess match, like my hope is that you find something there for you, because there's a deeply crispy thing that you can prove. You can prove that you can definitely outplay Mike at his own game, because you definitely can.
I mean, I think for the Spike player, I think there's one thing that's super important for a Spike player, and there's another thing that's super important for everybody who encounters a Spike player when playing your game. The thing that's super important for a Spike player is that your rules should be clear, frankly. Right. Tight, clear rules with minimal levels of mediation. And tracking back to Gaslands, the thing about Gaslands, I think, that makes it work wonderfully for a Spike player is that thing. It is the rule of carnage. Because the rule of carnage says you never need to have anything mediated. You can always predict how the rules will pan out in any given situation. And that's the most important thing, I think, for a Spike player in a sort of miniatures tabletop game that you can predict what will be the outcome of a particular rules interaction in these sorts of games. And I think equally, and I think as long as you've got a rule
right,
set,
because you're not playing, that player is not playing in a like hand holding way where they take the opposing player's hand across the table and they sweetly tell them in advance all the things they're going to do, which in a narrative game at its height, like you essentially are just doing a kind of collaborative storytelling using miniatures, and that's not what Spike's looking for at all. Like he wants to be able to surprise you, perhaps even gotcha you, but do so within an utterly crisp and defendable way that's like, well, you had all the same information I had, and therefore I played better than you. I outthought you.
100%. And I think the sorts of rules you see sometimes that are, that basically say there will be contradictions in these rules, and the rules won't answer certain questions that come up. When those happen, pick two options and roll a dice. That's quite anathema to the Spike player, because he's like, well, I can't know how the rules work. I cannot pre-plan for that given moment. Genuinely, at one table, it will have been the right decision to do this, and a different table, it would have been the wrong decision to do this because of how that deciding dice roll comes down. And like I say, the rule of carnage is a beautiful rule for Spike, because he goes, well, that's great, because it will always pan out the same at every single table. There is a position that can be made, an argument that could be made, and now I can know. And now, because of that, the whole rule set, although Gaslands is often presented as a very beer and pretzels game, it's a super tight rule set, because every single rule has a definitive answer to the outcome to it. It's what makes it very sort of playable as a tight game if you want to, and makes it something that a Spike player can engage with and can go, I never need to have doubt, I never need to wonder, I never need to go through arguing and then finding out on a dice roll that today the rule that I relied on yesterday isn't true anymore, which is absolutely anathema to them. I think the thing that you need for everybody who isn't a Spike player encountering a Spike player, which is a thing that I talk about again and again, is making sure that winning and having fun are basically doing the same thing. And it constantly baffles me, the number of designers who sort of go, well, I've put the fun thing, everyone will do the fun thing, otherwise they're an awful person. But there's a really unfun way of definitely winning. Won't I do that? Not unless you're terrible. Well, some people are going to do that. Why not just let them meet other people across the tabletop and not end up wanting to rip each other's heads off? Why not just make it so those two things are the same thing? And that's how you allow a competitive player. The very fact that what Timmy,
it's also just part of the basic reward loop of I'm inviting you to do a thing, and therefore I will reward you for doing that thing. And the easiest reward loop that you have is winning the game or giving you victory points.
And it's the thing is, it's like Timmy is sort of often seen as a really the most non-competitive personality type, and all they want to do is see things blow up. Spike is the most competitive personality type. All they want to do is beat you. If beating you means blowing all of your stuff up, then those two people are just going to absolutely love the same exact experience, because Spike's going to blow up all of Timmy's stuff and Timmy's going to laugh at Barorasi as it all blows up. And so there doesn't have to be a clash between those two people. It's just not necessary to not bring them together on the tabletop. You only don't allow those two people to play together when you say to Spike, hey, Spike, the way you win this game is just by walking off the table, doing nothing whatsoever, or pressing this big negate button, where every single time that Timmy tries to do something, you pull out a blue negate card and go, no, 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 no fun for you. Are we done yet? Are we done yet? Okay, we're done now.
Spike's not having fun either at that point.
I mean, no, the thing is, Spike is, because Spike knows that Spike's going to win, and that is the thing that drives him. And he's like, I'm disappointed that you didn't build a thing to make this harder for me. I'm disappointed in you, but I'm happy with my victory. And this thing, you can get these people together. And I think that's the most important point to sort of make in this part of the conversation, is that these people can all play at the same tabletop and can all enjoy the same game. And it's not, to me, it's one of the most upsetting things when I see a designer basically discount one or another of these personality types. Because the classic idea is like that Johnny basically looks down on Timmy as being some sort of naive, and looks down on Spike as being sort of non-creative and non-imaginative. And Spike looks down on Johnny for making up rules that don't exist and playing to an imaginary set of rules, and looks down on Timmy for being a nice,
even bothering to try to win.
Yeah, exactly, for not really caring about winning. And Timmy hates both of them for caring more about winning than about having fun or minding how the game comes out. And that, none of that is necessary. None of those sort of divide lines are necessary. All those people can enjoy the exact same thing. They have the same interests. You know, they want to show each other what they're doing. You know, Johnny wants to show Timmy this sort of magical thing that he's done, and like, oh, look at this amazing combo. Wasn't that sweet and delightful? You know, that was an experience, right? And you know, and Timmy wants to experience a thing that he hasn't seen before. He wants to see the T-Rex on the table, but he's more than happy to see your fireworks factory chain reaction. And Spike wants to be challenged by Johnny and is more than happy to pants Timmy in a way that Timmy finds enjoyable. So just do that. Just make these people enjoy each other. That should be what your design is aiming for.
I guess there's just a couple of other footnotes here. So one is clearly, although these player personas, these player personality types are being talked about as if they are individuals, it's really important to know that like every player contains a mix of these. And I think one of the things that I've observed is that I become more biased to one personality type or another depending on the game that I'm engaged with, and to a degree depending on the community that's built up around the game that I'm engaged with, and vice versa. I think there are games that engender more of a bias in their players towards one of these, by which I mean the people who come in and like the look of the game then sort of naturally drift in one direction or another because of what the game, how the game is presented or what it's telling them. And so yeah, like personally speaking, because when I was playing Malifaux second edition, I was doing it in a community that was quite competitive, and then I got really interested in the social aspect of the tournament scene, and so just played in a way that became, you know, I wasn't clever enough to come up with things, so I just played in a very Spike way, but one that led to a lot of, you know, really enjoyable cerebral experiences followed by extremely enjoyable social experiences. And I don't play almost any other games right now in that way. There are some board and card games I kind of deal with in that way. Oddly enough, like I'm happy to steal net lists for things like Arkham Horror, the card game, because I began by thinking, well, I'm kind of a Johnny on this and I want to learn how to make original lists. And then I realized I wanted to sort of perform well as part of a team. And so I was happy to focus on the winning part of it because it was part of a broader social fabric. So I think maybe I'm creating a sort of going off into some of the other things that we'll discuss maybe in the second half of this conversation in a subsequent video. But I just think it's important to know everyone is both a mixture of these and also shifts in their EQ depending on you as a games designer and the community that springs up around your game.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's all very true. And we'll sort of wrap this up in a second, but I think in relation to that, I think one of the things that's interesting when you see like second editions or expansions for games is how a game gets driven by what is perceived to be its primary customer base sometimes, which isn't 100% of its customer base. And sometimes that perception drives it away from the thing that attracted the people to it in the first place. And, you know, and some of these games can sort of lose their footing. It's like I was reading about the ending of Guild Ball, and that basically Guild Ball got killed by, you know, its player base liking what it was doing too much and them responding too much to the player base liking it, which is, that feels like it should be a sort of a perfect a utopian loop, but that it ended up just choking the life out of it. Right, we will sign off on this conversation. We'll move on with a couple of the other personality types in the next conversation, and also possibly chat a bit more about what the, you know, additional personality types or what a tabletop miniatures game brings in these areas. For now, if you know a player who is one of these types, who in the classic ideas of them maybe you shouldn't get on with, who you shouldn't enjoy playing games with, you know, because of the idea that these types are meant to clash and aren't meant to work in a particular game, and particularly if there was a game that made them work for you when you played against them, made the experience work when it shouldn't have done, and maybe where you haven't enjoyed it in other games, please, tell us that story. Tell us about the game. Tell us why you think it was able to bring those different personality types and different perspectives together. As I said, these are not sort of exhaustive categories. They're not exhaustive for Magic the Gathering players, and they're certainly not exhaustive for tabletop miniatures gamers. Drop in some ideas in the comment section about what might be miniatures wargamer personality type equivalents. If anywhere is going to start sort of saying what the categories are for miniatures tabletop gamers, it's probably going to be here. So we'd love to hear your opinions on it. While you're down there giving those comments, please do hit a like and subscribe, and then swing past the Discord channel, because if there's one place in the world that you could have a long and involved conversation about what personality types make up tabletop miniatures gamers, it's going to be the Rule of Carnage Discord, and we'd absolutely love to see you in there and having that chat. But for now, I think from this particular conversation, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.